Hi, I'm Coach Hallis, and welcome to episode 39 of the Keeping It Real vlog. Well, this is technically the 39th episode. A week of instruction has not passed since the last vlog because this is the last week, but I wanted to take some time to give a final reflection of the year holistically, which is another thing that we should do as teachers. At the end of our days, we reflect. At the end of our weeks, our units, our quarters, and of course, at the end of the year, you look back and you think about things from a perspective of, what went well, what can I do differently, what should we restructure. But what the lens that I thought would be best to look at it for the purposes of this vlog and sharing with you is kind of looking through the different ways that parts of project design affected each project now that we can look back holistically. And I did want to stress that there was a lot of supplemental instruction going on that wasn't really touched on throughout these vlogs, if I can reflect on the vlogging series itself, because that's not really the point of this conversation. But it does have to be brought up that during the first quarter, we were reading from a book of short stories along with the Act Local project, reading things written by a local author. When we were in our English 12, we supplemented some of the standards about poetry by reading Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. I don't remember if I mentioned that in the vlogs or not, but every week we were reading from a book of poetry and different ways that you fill in some of the standards that might not necessarily be 100% one-to-one conducive to your project. It's okay to say, hey, we're going to take 10 or 15 minutes here to look at this thing. Sometimes you do have to just explicitly teach certain things, as all kinds of different writing would come through when I would see trends in grammar or punctuation or things like this that needed to be touched on. If you've got like half the class making the same mistake, that's not necessarily something you have to do one-on-one. You can say, hey, I noticed that about half of our papers had this kind of error, so let's talk about it. And, you take 10 minutes or so and you work on those things. You still teach explicitly. It's just not all that you're doing. It's not the center of what you're doing. And because students tend to value the work that they're actually doing, they will actually be more invested in that 10-minute mini lesson that you give, that instead of it being like your whole day and then practicing it to practice it, they're learning it for the thing that they actually care about. So I put together pieces for each element of project design and the way that looked for different projects, because there's no one way of doing it. And in most projects, these things look different. So let's get into it. Project launches. So this is going to be kind of review, but also allowing us to look at these things side by side. So in quarter one, the Act Local project, we tasted items from the local bakery and the students wrote critiques to a small business owner. That business owner came in to evaluate the student critiques and talk about running a small business. So that allowed us to do multiple things at once. We learned how to give critique and receive critique before they got into having their own writing feedback given and received from each other. And they got an introduction to like what is a small business, because that's what they were writing about, was small businesses. So that project launch got them hooked in, got them invested, and got them interested in an authentic way. The $10 challenge was a very simple project launch where you're giving them a $10 bill, and it's simple and like straightforward. It doesn't get much more straightforward, especially like you can't think of anything that sounds more traditional than handing a student a piece of paper. But when that piece of paper that you're handing them is a $10 bill, it's one of the most attention-grabbing things that you can do. And it leads into this conversation about, what is that? What can you buy with that? What can you do with that? It's a very simple project launch, and that's what I did the other time that I've done this. I've done it twice now. And just giving them a $10 bill or an envelope. In this case, there was an envelope with their name on it, and there's a $10 bill inside of it. And it really gets people wondering, what's this for? What's this about? What's happening? What are we doing? Quarter three, we had the animal shelter visit, and officers explained like what sort of things does the community need better education about, and what is the purpose? What's the value of what we're making these dog houses for? And then Q4, we read that short story by about minority representation, followed by a Zoom visit by its local author. So, which is the picture there of Lamar Giles zooming in with us and talking about representation of minorities in different media and his experience as an author and a writer producing in that space. So those are 4 very different things, but they're all project launches. So you think about something that's exciting and interesting for students, or that you hope will be, and different ways that you might get to that hook, that you might get students interested in wondering, well, what can we do next? Or why should I care about this sort of thing? Your project launch should start to answer that question for you. Essential questions. I'll go through these quickly. How can we use our writing talents to help local business owners and customers? How can I use creativity to help my community and my voice to spread my message? How can I use research and writing to help people and animals in my city? And how can I challenge the established canon of what students are expected to experience and learn before graduating? You should notice some trends there. They all start with how, and that's not essential for an essential question, but it does lend you to having students find ways of doing things. And even if you're going to tell them this is how we're going to do this, they're going to find their own hows, and they're going to find their own ways of specifically accomplishing and answering those questions. Brainstorming and student voice and choice. So I've touched on this in more detail, of course, in the vlogs, but it's important that you have structure while giving room for students to have voice and choice. Students in the first one decided what local business they would each focus on for their assignment. So I'm telling you, you're going to be writing this article. You're going to write an article about a small business that you want to support and that you think deserves more attention and deserves more business. But I'm not telling you, I'm not assigning you the local business. I'm pushing that on you to go figure out what's that going to be. You go decide. And you had students choosing, one chose a thrift store, and one chose a restaurant, and one chose a pub. So you have different sorts of places that different students wanted to support. So they have that autonomy, and it gets them more invested. And then the $10 challenge is like the most loosely structured thing that I do, and I touched on in the blogging series, the benefits of strict and loose or tight and loose structures. But that is something where they had a large latitude of choice of what it is that they're going to do. But there is still a structure of this needs to be written in a speech this way that communicates it. And there were even those couple of rules of you can't add your own money to this and you can't do anything illegal. But there are confines there, and there are restraints in terms of what is expected in your presentation of this. You do have to give a public speech. It does have to fit these parameters. It does have to be written in a certain way. But there is more latitude in writing a speech than writing a traditional essay or article. And they got to choose the topic and what they were going to do for that topic. Students pick the theme of their article from a list that you see that I took a picture of over here. I had them kind of do a ranked choice vote on what they wanted to do as groups. So here are these, we've got 5 groups. Here are 7 different things. You all decide which of these would you prefer to have the most, and we'll make sure that people are writing about the things they want. And then, we're all going to make a doghouse. So in that part of it, and this might have gone differently. If this were a carpentry class and we were making doghouses, there might have been more autonomy in the building itself. So it might have been, hey, you're each going to get X amount of materials, and maybe designing the doghouse is part of a carpentry class, or it's part of an art class, something like that. If it were an art math combined class or something, this was an English class, an alternative English class. So I'm giving you the design for the doghouse, but you can decide what color you want it to be, and you can decide what artistic theme you're going to include in it. So what else are you going to paint on that? How are you going to make that fit the color that you chose? And how are you going to make this thing look impressive beyond just slapping some paint on a doghouse, which is okay. But we went to another level with that gave students some voice and choice beyond just the design that I gave them. And then, of course, lots of brainstorming and talking to different sources. The Canon Collage Project was all about student voice and choice. It's about them challenging the established canon. And so they had all the choice they could handle there. So you want to make sure you embed opportunities for that in your project design. Critique, drafting, and revision. In quarter 1, they practiced critique on food, music, and my work. Some things like some woodwork that I did. They looked at that and gave reviews and critiques of those things. Before they got to look at their own articles. So there's that in the first quarter. In the second quarter, students wrote multiple drafts of their speeches, which they were critiqued and revised throughout the project and practiced and further revised for time and confidence. So they still had to, look at each other's speeches, get feedback from me, had opportunities to revise it. This is how it's looking right now. What do we need to do to make it like ready for when you actually have to stand up there at the podium? The Animal Shelter Project, students offered and received critiques from their house design. So they had a draft of their house along with the first draft of their writing, the prototype along with the second draft of their writing, and then they used the revisions for that to make their final drafts. And then in the Canon Collage Project, they got some responses from me along the way, but they also had the Lamb Center for the Arts and Healing came in and gave them critique on their collage design. And then before they went from their initially published website to their website that was then like put out there with that collage where people are going to go look at your website, before they got to that final publication point, they had that one-on-one conversation with an adult who gave them some feedback, and they had a few days to make some final revisions there. And exhibitions, we talked about this recently. So exhibition doesn't have to be just the everybody comes together at one time and we all, the whole school is doing this sort of thing. The Act Local project, it was publishing something on the school's social media and the city's website, and then say, hey, this is the day it's happening, it's going live, and you can show them, hey, let's look at the city website, let's look at the school's Facebook page, let's look at the school's Twitter. Look, this stuff is out here now, it's live, it's published, it's public. And then you can follow up and talk to people about the responses that they got. The $10 challenge, the exhibition looked like a public speech exhibit, and that wasn't the whole school there, but we invited members of the public, we invited parents, and we filled up a room where people came to listen, and that's what that exhibition looked like. The Animal Shelter Project looked like the picture you see there, where the whole class went to the animal shelter and delivered these dog houses to the animal control officers and the staff there. And then the Canon Collage Project is it's on display right now at that local coffee shop, and people are looking at their websites right now. They get to see what sort of things that the kids created. So again, 4 things that all look very different, but they are technically exhibitions. And then those one-on-one conversations that they had, that kind of critique piece, is also kind of a soft exhibition, because for the first time, somebody outside of that classroom is getting a peek at what you're doing, and then you have to kind of give real responses to what they're talking about. So an exhibition can look like a lot of different things and still be good. And then assessments. All projects involve formative assessment along, on their different drafts. But in terms of final assessments, the Act Local project, there was an article that there was a rubric the students' articles were judged against. In the $10 challenge, the panel of judges gave them feedback, and there was a rubric against which that was judged, along with the project itself, or the thing that they did with their $10. Students' final articles were graded along with a rubric for the quality of their dog houses, so article rubric and dog house rubric for the Animal Project, the Animal Shelter Project, and there were 3 components to that Canon Collage project that went into a final exam grade, which were the finished product of their published website, their finished laser engraved collage, and the rating that the adult had from that one-on-one conversation. And so student reflections. At the end of every project, students have an opportunity to reflect. Most of those were done verbally for our first one, but there were a couple that they did in writing. And then all the other ones, I did take a Google Form survey for them to do some reflections. And they all essentially asked the same sort of things. Like, what was the most challenging part of this for you? Sometimes, like, how does it feel to be done with this? Or what does it look like now that you're done? What surprised you about the project is the kind of question you might ask in reflections. And then in every reflection, I always ask something to the effect of, if you could go back and tell yourself something at the start of the project, or you could go back and do this over again, what advice would you give yourself, or how would you do this differently? And so you can see their responses to this. I will link the slide deck in this video. So that is the different parts of project design elements, looking at each quarter project that we did. Again, lots of supplemental material mixed into each of those, but I wanted to look at this as a whole so that we could get a sense of how many different ways there are to do these same elements. And you don't have to fall into this rut of, this is what a project launch looks like. A project launch doesn't have to be like a field trip. That's a way of doing a project launch, but project launches can do all sorts of things. Your exhibitions don't have to be the thing that you see High Tech High do and most likely to succeed. You know, sometimes you're, especially if you are an outlier in your school, if you don't have a lot of buy-in of other people doing project-based learning, and you don't have these like grade-wide or school-wide exhibitions, it's okay. You can they can look different ways, and that's true for each of these steps. So as long as you are incorporating some version of these elements of design, you can have a pretty quality project, and it doesn't have to be perfect the first time you do it. So that's part of why we reflect on the work that we do, and that's why we try to get a little bit better every day. We try to get better at the end of every unit, every project, every semester, every year, and don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So hopefully reflecting on the year as a whole and looking at these different pieces side by side helps in the plans for your projects.